You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 13th of January 2014. Muslim-only cemetery for 4,000 next to village with only 613 residents. 1 in 10 babies in England is a Muslim. Young woman sexually assaulted near church in De Paris Avenue. Half of all convicted pickpockets on the tube are Romanian. 80% of young Spaniards depend on their families. Turkey's economic development does not stop the plight of child brides. European court vetoes Swiss refugee deportation. Horrors of Al-Qaeda prisons in Syria exposed. US has deployed military advisors to Somalia, officials say. Thought for the day, racists, soaps, propaganda and Brits. And finally, a really tasteless joke. Enjoy. UK news. Muslim-only cemetery for 4,000 next to village with only 613 residents. Residents of Catherine de Barnes near Solihull, West Midlands are objecting to plans for a large Muslim-only cemetery after realising it would be for 4,000 bodies. The cemetery would be able to comply fully with Sharia law, which stipulates a method of bathing and shrouding the bodies of Muslims before they are buried with their heads facing towards Mecca. Solihull Council has received several letters of complaint about the plans, which were proposed by Mohammed Musa. The objections focus on the size of the cemetery and the decision to place the patch on fertile land in the Green Belt. A planning statement from Cemetery Development Services said few burial authorities are able to facilitate full Muslim burials in accordance with the practice of Sharia law. Bob Slay, a member of the Town Council, said there is sufficient space already available at the borough's 2 main cemeteries. He said, "The issue here is whether there is an overriding need, and I don't believe there is. I do not believe this is an appropriate development in Greenbelt land." World at 8. This is yet another example of not fitting into a country culturally. It isn't yet a Muslim country, so if in doubt send their dead back to where they came from for burial. We don't have enough room on this island for the living, let alone the foreign dead. 1 in 10 babies in England is a Muslim. 1 in 10 children under the age of 4 is now Muslim in England and Wales, the latest statistics show. In the under 5s age group there are nearly twice as many people identified as Muslim as in the general population, census data reveals. One expert said the number of practising Muslims could soon outnumber the number of Christians who actively worship in the UK. David Voas, Professor of Population Studies at the University of Essex, told The Times it's not inconceivable. Ibrahim Mogra, Assistant Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, said that the large number of young Muslim children reflected the confidence that Muslims had in the country, encouraging them to bring up families here. "I just wouldn't want our fellow citizens to be alarmed by an increase in number," he said. "This generation is very much British. They feel very much this is their home. It's not about Britain becoming a Muslim country, but about Britain enabling the practice of Islam, which gives confidence to the vast majority of Muslims. It's a great country to regard as our home." World at 8. Bollocks. It's where they get virtually everything free, as well as being safely thousands of miles away from the places which Islam has made unlivable in for some. We need to stop any more Muslim invasions and start deportations, or rules to make their lives a bit more realistic in a foreign land. No halal, no mosques, no polygamy, no benefits, no businesses or property ownership, alias like other non-immigration countries. Young woman sexually assaulted near church in De Paris Avenue. A woman was sexually assaulted on her way home from a night out with friends in Bedford in the early hours of Sunday morning, January the 5th. The 19-year-old had been in the High Street area and phoned her boyfriend to come and pick her up. However, she decided to walk towards his home to meet him, and when she reached the trees just past the church in De Paris Avenue, she was suddenly grabbed by a man who pushed her over and pinned her to the ground. Police say that while she was struggling with him, her phone rang, and this seems to have spooked the attacker as he ran away, taking her white Samsung Galaxy phone with him. The woman was able to get up and fortunately was soon found by her boyfriend coming in to fetch her. The woman suffered cuts and grazes where she was pushed over. The offender is described as an Asian man in his 20s, slim build with a round face and short hair, wearing jeans. Half of all convicted pickpockets on the tube are Romanian. Figures released by British Transport Police show half of all convictions for pickpocketing on the London Underground are handed out to Romanians. Information revealed through a Freedom of Information request shows out of the 5,280 reported pickpocketing incidents on the London Underground between November 1st, 2012 and October 31st, 2013, there were just 170 convictions. Of those convictions, 52% were Romanian. An estimated 68,000 Romanians live in Britain, but there have been 28,000 arrests of Romanian people for serious offences over the past 5 years. World at 8, which bears out the World at 8 comments that Romanians have been here for years illegally, with or without the Schengen business. What are we going to do? Send all the illegal ones home to make room for the new legal migrants? European news. 80% of young Spaniards depend on their families. 8 in 10 Spaniards aged 18 to 24 believe they'll be forced to work menial jobs in spite of their qualifications, and 60% are willing to emigrate in search of work, according to the Reina Sofia Centre survey released Wednesday. Also, according to the survey of 1,000 respondents, 80% said they are being supported by their families in spite of their job training, 70% blamed the length and severity of the recession on government and politicians, and 20% said the situation won't improve for the next 2 years at least. 36% said the situation will only get worse. Overall, the study showed the economic crisis is undermining the survival and integration into society of middle and low income respondents and of those who quit school, and that it threatens the life goals and expectations of those who come from high income backgrounds and or are still enrolled in university. Turkey's economic development does not stop the plight of child brides. Economic growth and development in modern Turkey have not affected the ancient practice of arranged marriages between teenage girls and older men. According to the Interior Ministry, 134,629 persons under 18 were married off in Turkey in the last 3 years. Of these, 128,866 were girls, a rate 20 times higher than that of boys. Speaking to Al Monitor, Gulten Kaya, head of the Female Lawyers Commission of the Union of Turkish Bar Associations, warned that there is an increase of 94% in application to courts by families to get marriage permits. Underage marriages have a strong impact on teenagers and are often linked to poverty, lack of education or to religion. A recent study by Erhan Tunk, professor at Gaziantep University, looked at marriages with minors in various regions of Turkey. Tunk's team found that 82% of child brides are illiterate. This practice is most prevalent in Sanliurfa on the Syrian border, where the proportion of marriages with someone under 16 increases to 60%. And as in other countries in the Middle East, young brides usually end up with older men, widowers or even men who rape them. Turkish newspapers report cases of violence against children almost on a daily basis. World at 8. It is the way of Islam, and Turkey is entirely an Islamic country, not a European one. European Court vetoes Swiss refugee deportation. The European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg has decided that Switzerland is not allowed to deport an asylum seeker from Sudan, overruling a verdict by the Swiss authorities. The court on Tuesday vetoed the planned expulsion, arguing that there is a risk that the Sudanese asylum seeker would be subject to torture in his home country after becoming politically active in Switzerland. The judges in Strasbourg argued that the deportation was in breach of the European Convention and that not only people holding executive positions in opposition movements are in danger, but also all those who are suspected of supporting them. World at 8. Why should Europe concern itself with the awful machinations of places like Sudan? All these countries are being torn apart by the very people who run away when things become too difficult. Send them all back, perhaps they can fight to make their country better instead of bringing our countries down. World news. Horrors of Al-Qaeda prisons in Syria exposed. Torture, indiscriminate killings and abuse in the manner, if not worse, than that suffered for decades in the prisons of the Syrian regime have been reported by civilians and rebels on their release from Al-Qaeda prisons in Aleppo in northern Syria. For days, the Al-Qaeda fighters of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have been under attack at the Idlib Aleppo, Raqqa and Deir el-Azor regions by an unprecedented front of nationalist rebels and radical Islamic groups. Some of ISL's prisons have been opened by insurgents and released detainees during the clashes. According to Syrian opposition sources, prior to the recent anti-Al-Qaeda offensive, about 1,500 people were being held in ISIL prisons. Some of the survivors of the inferno of Qadi Askar and Aleppo say that many of the detainees were rebels from anti-regime groups, including members of radical Islamic groups, and that many of them had been killed in jail. They killed them brigade by brigade. They, Al-Qaeda, would have continued until the entire country was under their control, one of the survivors said. World at 8. And yet our papers are still full of warring anti-Assad factions in our own backyard and seem to be backing, as usual, the rebel faction. Tribes don't change and the Middle East will always be at war, even more now that Islam is becoming stronger. Leopards do not change their spots and cruelty to prisoners is endemic to these tribes. You see, the Assad regime and Saddam handled their countries in the appropriate manner. Fire with fire. You don't bring a stick to a gun party, do you? Well, only in the UK. US has deployed military advisors to Somalia, officials say. The US military secretly deployed a small number of trainers and advisors to Somalia in October, the first time regular troops have been stationed in the war-ravaged country since 1993, when 2 helicopters were shot down and 18 Americans killed in the Black Hawk Down disaster. A cell of US military personnel has been in the Somali capital of Mogadishu to advise and coordinate operations with African troops fighting to wrest control of the country from the Al-Shabaab militia, an Islamic group whose leaders have professed loyalty to Al-Qaeda, according to 3 US military officials. The previously undisclosed deployment of fewer than 24 troops reverses 2 decades of US policy that effectively prohibited military boots on the ground in Somalia. Even as Somali pirates and terrorists emerged as the top security threat in the region, successive presidential administrations and the Pentagon shied away from sending troops there for fear of a repeat of the Black Hawk Down debacle. In recent years, the Obama administration has slowly and cautiously become more directly involved in Somalia. We eventually need to establish a permanent US diplomatic presence in Somalia, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the State Department's Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, told a Senate panel in October. Ultimately, it is the security conditions in Somalia that will dictate when we can establish a more permanent presence, and we recognise the time is not right to do this. World at 8. Home from home for Obama. Florida citrus growers worry that deadly bacteria will mean end of orange juice. The sprawling citrus orchard that Victor Story toured recently sure looked like a steal at $11,000 an acre. The investors who owned it were going to lose money, and potential buyers such as Story might have stood to reap a handsome reward. But as he bumped along the 40 acres of groves in the large SUV, Story was taken aback by the sickly look of the trees. Their leaves were an inch shorter than normal and yellowing. Full-size oranges were still apple green. Other mature oranges that should have been the size of baseballs were no bigger than ping-pong balls. That fruit's never going to be of any value, said Story, 68, who has been growing fruit all his life. He said his pickers wouldn't even bother to reach for it. It's going to fall off the tree. It's never going to get squeezed, he said. These investors paid $15,000 an acre for that grove. I know because they bought it from a friend. I frankly don't think it will sell for $11,000. What Story saw in the orchard at Polk County, Florida wasn't an anomaly. It's the new norm in the Sunshine State, where about half the trees in every citrus orchard are stricken with an incurable bacterial infection from China that goes by many names. One of them, Huanglongbing, yellow dragon disease, and citrus greening. Growers, agriculturists and academics liken it to cancer. Roots become deformed, fruits drop from limbs prematurely and rot. The tree slowly dies. The bacteria is spread by a tiny invasive bug, also from China, called Asian citrus psyllid. It acquires the bacteria while feeding on the leaves of infected trees, then transmits it when feeding on healthy trees, akin to the way mosquitoes transfer malaria. Psyllids were first detected in a Broward County, Florida garden in 1998 and spread to 31 other counties within 2 years. The Asian strain of the bacteria was discovered in 2005 just south of Miami. The disease ruins the look and taste of the fruit but isn't known to harm humans. Florida citrus, which provides up to 80% of US orange juice, has been hardest hit, but the disease, which also has an African and Latin American strain, also has been detected in Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Arizona and California. It spread to other parts of the world including Mexico, India, Sub-Saharan Africa and Brazil, which provide nearly 20% of the orange juice Americans drink. In each case the impact of citrus has been devastating. Worldwide concern prompted 500 scientists from more than 20 nations to gather in Orlando last February for a conference on huanglongbing. Despite the fact that nearly $80 million has been poured into research on the disease, scientists still don't know how to eliminate the bacteria or remove it from the trees. World at 8. Sounds like a dirty Chinese joke, doesn't it? Yet another example of the sodding yellow peril that is Chinese. Why can't they keep their diseases to themselves? Perhaps a psyllid that kills Chinese only could be invented. We should never have allowed China to open up and export anything. Most things that kill plants and animals and indeed people originate in China. Thought for the day. Racists, soaps, propaganda and Brits. Now we are a strange lot, aren't we? We're exhibiting all the good and bad manners of true islanders, even though the rest of Europe seem hell-bent on making us either a state or an annex of Europe, and behold, the rest of the world are also intent on making sure we, as an island, contain vast numbers of every nationality in that world, so that we lose track of exactly who we once were. Put this with a steady stream of propaganda within our educational systems and media, and the job is almost done. The one telling statement that came out of the Sherlock Holmes series last night was when the villain, who is of course white, fascist and rich, came out with the premise that the UK is a trial ground for the rest of the world, and if it works in England it'll work for other countries. And that is one of the truest statements to come out of the BBC in years. Here we are sitting on a small island in the North Sea adjacent to Norway and Sweden on the globe, and if it weren't for the Gulf Stream we'd be covered in snow most of the year, and it certainly is not our climate or friendly nature that attracts the millions of migrants it has done. It's our benefit system and also our apparent ignorance of what accepting these millions does to our own country over a period of time. So our previously green and pleasant land is under invasion from the entire world, and only just now, this year, have any vague rumblings of anti-immigration been heard from anyone not a nationalist, or in fact those who have spent their political lives badgering and belittling the nationalist creed, which has been mainly based on being anti-immigration. Now suddenly it is accepted, and I find that very strange indeed, and yet another facet of the two-faced Brit establishment. Being a nationalist means you put your country and your people first when it comes to benefits, handouts, jobs et al, and by virtue of doing just that, this means that anyone who is not your tribe or partially your tribe is going to miss out, and anyone who's coming into the country will also get short shrift, and there's a reason for this. In practical terms, which we're only just cottoning on to in the UK, you cannot give all to the world all the time and ignore your own tribe. It isn't fair, and it isn't even financially viable in this day and age. For years our various governments have encouraged immigration from the furthest corners of the world, peoples who have no history with England and share absolutely no cultural or religious ties with us at all, and we've been paying out for the privilege to boot. For at least 40 years we, the taxpayers, have been handing out money to peoples from Asia, Africa and India, and countries we'd rarely heard of before then, in the form of help and benefits. They have received money for cars, phones, interpreters to help them fill out forms for more money, carers, social welfare help, houses adapted for their religious wants, polygamy paid for and accepted in a Christian country. Their children have been educated and further educated for free, and their sick and retarded cared for by our NHS and social services. We have been bullied and told that these people are necessary for our survival, as all the Brits seem to want from any migrant is a takeaway, and the effect this has had on our high streets, towns and villages is enormous, but has been steadily ignored for the last several decades, so as not to halt the flow from abroad or the unreported invasion. Now all of a sudden the Eastern Europeans are taking the flak for all the mistakes that our governments have made over the last 4 generations, and wow, we've suddenly woken up to the fact we have strangers in our midst. However, they're not quite as strange as all the strangers we have had colonising our towns and cities and hardly fitting in with their very different dress, cultures and religions being painfully obvious, to be honest. But hell, now we have white faces who do not speak English very well and are prepared to work, not groom our children, fiddle benefits, take up drug running and gangs, bring in bushmeat and make halal meat de rigueur for all, sell alcohol and drugs to underage kids, protest at every titch and turn, rebuild our cities in their image, become landlords that put Peter Ackman to shame, and indeed even let out their sheds, ignore boundaries and parking rights of others, and indeed if possible build over them, and generally act in a third world manner by ghettoising themselves as soon as they set foot on this land. So excuse me if I find this sudden concern and very mixed message from the main political parties a bit farcical in the extreme. Of course the media love it because they think it makes them look concerned about us, when in fact the media couldn't care less about anyone but the bottom line, and in fact have been for years promoting the multicultural society for all it's worth. So we are now seeing multiculturalism in all its ghastly glory on the TV night after night, and at one point I would make is that throughout time the one way one person or tribe recognised another is from the appearance of that person or tribe. You can't get away from it. It isn't racist, it's human nature. If you're not unfortunately blind or have bad sight, this is the faculty you learn to use when very young: your eyes. Why should you ignore the colour of a man's skin in recognising that man? What is wrong with different skin colour? You tell me. We are apparently discouraged from using this facility in describing a person or tribe and even in jokes. Since when did a person's colour or appearance take on such a hallowed form? Before racism reared its head, plus the multicultural invasion of our country, the black and white minstrels were great. Robinson's Gollywog always had a place in my heart and home, and we could laugh at Alf Garnett, and no one had heard the word racist being bandied about as if it were a normal sin. Chalky from Jim Davison ruled the heart, and I still love Chalky without reservation, and I miss him. I'm sure the West Indians loved him too, so who put a stop to Jim's comic career? The Human Rights Brigade or the Black Equality Prats? Certainly not the TV Oompa Loompas who insist on making Emmerdale something out of the Gaza Strip, where I've seen more people passing for white than should be necessary, and marrying out is de rigueur. Coronation Street has 2 new characters, one ex-Emmerdale and passing for northern white, and the other black, plus of course a plethora of gays all fancying one another, to which one girl commented on as being sweet. And of course EastEnders, which if it stuck to true stats would be totally black, Asian and Russian, but has to make do with quite a few black characters, all fancying whites of course, because we cannot have anything less than a black-white partnership or Asian mix-up. And as the Archangel said, and thou must have gays, and we certainly do, currently in the form of the son of the new owners of the Queen Vic. Soon he'll be trouncing around with a sodding handbag. He's already let down the square bicycle, gorgeous though she is. So our TV friends are obviously trying to get the message across. We are a multicultural society, or words to that effect, but I would argue with that. If you have to justify something so much and harp on the positive facts when it means that we Brits have not accepted the message wholeheartedly, doesn't it? In one breath we are told to look at people of foreign blood and mixed races without noticing that they are just that. In short, a subliminal message is being sent out all the time, to our children, to our teens and to us. Accept, but don't notice, don't comment and don't question. Like Stalin and Big Brother 1984 style. Once you start to notice and question, then the trouble starts. Why shouldn't I notice new black faces in a soap? Aren't they proud to be black or Asian or whatever? I don't particularly like massive amounts of different races in my country, but I don't judge them because of their colour, and they should not judge us for what we are. Why are the black races more than any other afraid of being black? In the States there is $100 million industry in hair straightening, false hair, weaves and wigs, and $80 million of it is to the black population of girls and women. It is the same over here, along with the awful false nails in zebra stripes. Now this is hardly celebrating one's ethnicity, is it? The only people to make any money out of this are the white suppliers of the awful chemicals used in hair straightening, and believe me, they send their little girls of 18 months to have their hair made natural. The Chinese and Koreans with their bits and pieces, and the Indians who take the hair from the temples and export it to the States and the UK. So in truth there is a form of slavery which the blacks will never admit, and they are bringing it on themselves. If I were black and had a wonderfully shaped head, I would wear my hair in a close crop and be proud to do something no other race could do. I had enough trouble at my school when my naturally curly black hair would not sit down and I couldn't wear my beret, and all my friends had long mousy pigtails which I wanted but I couldn't get. So I understand wanting to be different, but so much is made out of being black and yet they are denying being black, and no one can remark on them being black either. Perverse, isn't it, when we in the UK are told we must accept all foreigners and keep quiet about it, except apparently when they are white and European. The media must now accept that people should be able to remark on someone's colour if they need to. Why ignore what we are being forced to celebrate? If a rapist is brown, yellow or black, say so. If a criminal is black or yellow with pink spots, say so. Mixed race, say so. If you notice, if you step outside the law and you're white, it's all over the papers like a rash with pictures and even your dog, and no one must talk about the elephant in the room. Now I cannot stand the Romas. I'm not too keen on Bulgarians or Romanians or Eastern Europeans of any ilk. But we've had the Arabs and Russians over here for years taking over London. So what gets me is the fact that we are still pro-Islam in this country, and it is the Muslims who don't like the Eastern Europeans and have history with them. This is why the media is full of white English benefit frauds, streets where the only good person is an elderly black man and the rest are evil Europeans, and I know for a fact that certain streets of Kent are full of Romas and worse. This is because the Europeans go to places where their pals went, and Kent and the south east and south west are prime targets, as are the vegetable farms of Lincolnshire. The Poles and others are not going to go to places like Birmingham, Manchester and Leicester because they have already been taken over by the Asian immigrants years before. Even High Wycombe in Bucks has a very high Asian population in the south east. We'll leave Southall out of it as has been lost for 30 years, so not much chance of Europeans finding a place there. I don't like unfairness, and we Brits are being treated unfairly, and the latest snippet of being nasty to the Eastern Europeans is not helpful. We Brits have been made to ignore different tribes coming into this country. We've been forced to look at them on the media in ever-increasing numbers and still not comment as it is racist. However, when the invasion becomes mainly white from the EU, we are now being encouraged to be racist towards tribes fairly similar to our own tribes. Odd, isn't it? Now, I'm not for giving benefits to anyone who comes into the country, and indeed call for a total stop to all immigration from anywhere in the EU and the world in general. Our benefit system needs overhauling, as does our foreign aid dilemma. By the time we've paid out for many years and given foreign aid and manufacturing rights to the rest of the world, there's nothing left for us Brits or our country. Facts are facts. It doesn't matter what colour you are or where you're from. It doesn't matter if you've been here 40 years or 4 months. All benefits to all people who've come here or have children born here must be re-evaluated, and the same for us Brits. Although it is us Brits who will bear the cost socially of less money for education, health and social services in the long run. It isn't racist, it's tribalism at its best. Other countries practice tribalism in cruder forms and kill other tribes. We don't do that, but we are in danger of making a scapegoat of the wrong tribe as we get poorer as a country. Extreme immigration needs extreme measures, and shutting our eyes will not help. And finally, this is so tasteless it cries out to be shared. The mother of all jihadist jokes. Two Middle Eastern mothers are sitting in a cafe chatting over a plate of tabbouleh and a pint of goat's milk. The older of the two pulls a small folder out of her handbag and starts flipping through photos. They start reminiscing. This is my oldest son, Mujibar. He would have been 24 years old now. Yes, I remember him as a baby, says the other mother cheerfully. He's a martyr now though, the mother confides. Oh, so sad dear, says the other. And this is my second son, Khalid. He would have been 21. Oh, I remember him, said the other happily. He had such curly hair when he was born. He's a martyr too, said the mother quietly. Oh, gracious me, said the other. "This is my third son, my baby, my beautiful Ahmed. He would have been 18, she whispers. "Yes," said the friend enthusiastically, "I remember when he first started school." "He's a martyr also," says the mother with tears in her eyes. After a pause and a deep sigh, the second Muslim mother looks wistfully at the photographs and, searching for the right words, she says, "They blow up so fast, don't they?" You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. In Greenbelt land. World at 8. This is yet another example of not fitting into a country culturally. It isn't yet a Muslim country, so if in doubt send their dead back to where they came from for burial. We don't have enough room on this island for the living, let alone the foreign dead. 1 in 10 babies in England is a Muslim. 1 in 10 children under the age of 4 is now Muslim in England and Wales, the latest statistics show. In the under 5s age group there are nearly twice as many people identified as Muslim as in the general population, census data reveals. One expert says 1 in 10 babies in England is a Muslim. Young woman sexually assaulted near church in De Paris Avenue. Half of all convicted pickpockets on the tube are Romanian. 80% of young Spaniards depend on their families. Turkey's economic development does not stop the plight of child brides. European court vetoes Swiss refugee deportation. Horrors of Al-Qaeda prisons in Syria exposed. US has deployed military advisors to Somalia, officials say. Thought for the day: racists, soaps, propaganda and Brits. And finally, a really rich proposed by Mohammed Musa. The objections focus on the size of the cemetery and the decision to place the patch on fertile land in the Green Belt. A planning statement from Cemetery Development Services said few burial authorities are able to facilitate full Muslim burials in accordance with the practice of Sharia law. Bob Slay, a member of the Town Council, said there is sufficient space already available at the borough's 2 main cemeteries. He said, "The issue here is whether there is an overriding need, and I don't believe there is. I do not believe this is an appropriate development."
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 13th of January 2014. Muslim-only cemetery for 4,000 next to village with only 613 residents. Really tasteless joke. Enjoy. UK news. Muslim-only cemetery for 4,000 next to village with only 613 residents. Residents of Catherine de Barnes near Solihull, West Midlands are objecting to plans for a large Muslim-only cemetery after realising it would be for 4,000 bodies. The cemetery would be able to comply fully with Sharia law, which stipulates a method of bathing and shrouding the bodies of Muslims before they are buried with their heads facing towards Mecca. Solihull Council has received several letters of complaint about the plans, which